Pin and stitch the back panel's right sides together. I've done that already here. Before you start stitching, make sure you've marked the seam allowance of the vent on the right back panel. You stitch up to the marked point, backstitch, pivot your needle, stitch up to the other marked point 1 centimeter away from the edge of the vent, and backstitch again. After stitching the back panels together, you need to press as sewn. This means that you press the seam as you've stitched it before pressing the seam open. This is a tailoring technique that will help the stitches to settle before pulling on them when pressing the seam allowance open. Before pressing open the back seam, you're going to snip in the seam allowance at the corner where the back seam meets the vent. I'm using a wool offcut when pressing the interfaced bits as much as I can. When pressing the seams open, I don't do this because I want my seams as crisp as they can be. I just try to avoid pressing on the interfacing as much as I can. After pressing open the seams, you can sometimes see a little ridge on either side of the seam. I solve this by lifting the fabric and lightly ironing along the seam with a lot of steam and without pressing too hard. I marked the left side of the coat so you can see what I'm doing. You fold the vent to the left side using the notch at the bottom. I press the left side of the vent first, then I go over it again with both layers of the vent so it's all nice and straight. Pull the right side of the vent out of the way and hand baste the left side of the vent. This is the vent from the right side of the fabric. Now it's time to sew the sleeves to the front and back panels, and then you're going to sew the side seams. I'm going to speed up this part of the video because there's not as much to explain, but do remember to press the seams as sewn before pressing the seams open. Don't press open the seams of the sleeves, but press them toward the side of the sleeve you want your top stitching to end up from both the wrong side and the right side of the fabric. Like I just explained, instead of pressing the seams open, the pattern tells you to press the seam allowances toward the side of the seam you want your top stitching to be. I am pressing the seams open here because I didn't know which side my mom would prefer, and honestly, top stitching with just one layer of seam allowance worked just as well. It might even work better if your wool is super thick, so make that decision based on your preference. The pattern is designed with partly top stitch sleeve seams pivoting toward the seam at the point where the top stitching ends. The pattern tells you how and where to top stitch exactly, but this is obviously totally up to you. For example, the pattern tells you to top stitch on the sleeve side of the seam, but for this coat I opted to top stitch on the back and front panels instead. In some other coats I made, I divided the raglan sleeve pattern into two parts, adding seam allowance of course, and top stitch from the neck down to the sleeve hem, which also looks really cool. You can do whatever you like. The rest of the coat will be top stitched at the end of the sewing process. There's no need to worry about that now. Next, you can go ahead and stitch the side seams, pressing as sewn and then pressing open the seams. So at this point, you've stitched the entire body together. In the next video, I'll show you the process of sewing the collar to the body.